This is the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite.
Good evening. The death of a man who sang and played the guitar overshadows the news from Poland, Iran, and Washington tonight. Former Beatle John Lennon, who was 40, was shot and killed last night outside his luxury apartment in New York. The alleged killer is an unemployed security guard and printer who had lived in Hawaii. News of Lennon's death touched off a wave of shock and mourning around the world.
December 8, 1980, 5 p.m. The Dakota, West 72nd Street, Manhattan. John Lennon exits the Gothic archway of his apartment building with Yoko Ono, heading to the record plant studio for a late mixing session. A small crowd lingers outside, fans, photographers, autograph seekers. Among them, a pudgy 25-year-old man in a winter coat, holding a copy of Double Fantasy, Lennon's new album. His name is Mark David Chapman. He's been waiting all day. As John approaches, Chapman extends the album. John pauses, takes it, signs his name across the cover. A photographer captures the moment, John Lennon, signing an autograph for the man who will kill him 5 hours later. Chapman doesn't pull a gun. He doesn't speak. He just watches as John and Yoko climb into a limousine and disappear. Chapman remains outside, waiting. But here's what the timeline shows that no one understood until after. Chapman had flown to New York 3 days earlier with a loaded .38 revolver. He'd stood outside the Dakota repeatedly. Security had seen him. Other fans had spoken to him. John's assistant had noticed him that morning. For 3 days, Mark David Chapman had been hiding in plain sight. The question isn't why did Chapman shoot John Lennon? It's why, in those 5 hours between the autograph and the murder, did no one realize he was still there? John Winston Lennon was born October 9, 1940, in Liverpool, England, during a German air raid. His father, Alfred, was a merchant seaman who abandoned the family. His mother, Julia, handed him over to her sister Mimi to raise, a wound that never fully healed. John grew up angry, sharp-tongued, brilliant, and deeply insecure. Julia remained in his life, teaching him banjo, introducing him to rock and roll, but when John was 17, she was struck and killed by an off-duty police officer. John never forgave the world for taking her. Music became his only outlet. In 1957, John formed a skiffle group called the Quarrymen. At a church fete that July, he met Paul McCartney. Paul was younger, prettier, more technically skilled, but John recognized something, an equal. They began writing together. George Harrison joined. Then Ringo Starr. By 1960, they were the Beatles, grinding through Hamburg clubs, learning to perform, to survive. In 1962, they signed with manager Brian Epstein and producer George Martin. In 1963, Please Please Me hit #1 in the UK. Beatlemania exploded. By 1964, they'd conquered America, Ed Sullivan, Screaming Girls, mop-top haircuts, Suits. John was the leader, the sharp wit, the rebel. But he was also trapped. The Beatles became a phenomenon so massive it consumed them. Touring became unbearable, crowds so loud they couldn't hear themselves play. John started resenting it. In 1965, they played Shea Stadium to 55,000 fans and hated every second. Behind the smiles, John was unraveling. He took LSD. He read philosophy. He questioned everything: fame, identity, meaning. In 1966, he told a journalist, "We're more popular than Jesus now." The backlash was vicious: death threats, album burnings, boycotts. The Beatles stopped touring. They retreated into the studio. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, Revolver, The White Album, masterpieces born from isolation and tension. Then John met Yoko Ono. November 1966, at a London gallery. She was a Japanese avant-garde artist, older, controversial, challenging. John was mesmerized. By 1968, they were inseparable. He left his wife, Cynthia, and son, Julian, another abandonment that mirrored his father's. Yoko became his partner in everything: music, art, activism, bed-ins for peace. The other Beatles hated her presence in the studio. Fans blamed her for breaking up the band. The racism and misogyny directed at Yoko was relentless. John didn't care. In 1969, he married her. In 1970, Paul announced the Beatles were over. John felt liberated. The 1970s were chaos. John released Raw, confessional solo albums, Plastic Ono Band, Imagine. He and Yoko moved to New York in 1971, embracing activism, protesting the Vietnam War. The Nixon administration tried to deport him. FBI surveillance, harassment, paranoia. John fought back legally and won. But the pressure fractured him. In 1973, he and Yoko separated. His lost weekend, 18 months of drinking, drug use, self-destruction in Los Angeles. By 1975, they reconciled. Yoko became pregnant. On John's 35th birthday, October 9, 1975, their son Sean was born. John stopped making music. He became a house husband, baking bread, raising Sean, finding peace for the first time in his life. For 5 years, he disappeared. Then, in 1980, he returned. August 1980. John and Yoko are in Bermuda. John starts writing again, songs pouring out of him. He's happy, energized, 40 years old and finally comfortable in his own skin. He calls Yoko, "I've got an album." They return to New York and begin recording Double Fantasy, a joint album, husband and wife trading songs about love, parenthood, survival. It's released November 17, 1980. Reviews are mixed. Some critics call it soft, self-indulgent. John doesn't care. He's not trying to be edgy. He's trying to be honest. Interviews are everywhere. Playboy, Rolling Stone, BBC. John is open, reflective, talking about the Beatles without bitterness, about Yoko with gratitude, about Sean with joy. He feels reborn. But something else is happening. Mark David Chapman, a security guard from Hawaii, is unraveling. He's obsessed with The Catcher in the Rye. He despises John Lennon, not for his music, but for his perceived hypocrisy. John sings Imagine No Possessions while living in the Dakota, one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings. Chapman sees him as a phony, a sellout, a symbol of everything fake in the world. On December 6th, Chapman flies to New York. He checks into the YMCA, then the Sheraton. He buys a copy of Double Fantasy. He loads his Charter Arms .38 special revolver with hollow point bullets, designed to expand on impact, maximizing damage. On December 8th, he takes a taxi to the Dakota. He arrives in the morning. He waits. December 8th, 1980. Morning. Chapman stands outside the Dakota. He's bundled in a coat, unremarkable, patient. Other fans are there, regulars who camp outside hoping for a glimpse of John. Chapman blends in. Around 10:30 a.m., John's assistant, Fred Seaman, exits the building. Chapman approaches, asks if John will be out today. Seaman says probably later. Chapman nods. He waits. Around 2 p.m., photographer Paul Gorish arrives. He and Chapman chat casually. Gorish mentions he's hoping to photograph John. Chapman says he's waiting for an autograph. They talk about music, about the Beatles. Chapman seems polite, soft-spoken, normal. At 8:05 p.m., John and Yoko emerge. Chapman steps forward, holding Double Fantasy. John takes it, uncaps a pen, signs John Lennon 1980 across the cover. Paul Gorish snaps the photograph, John handing the album back to Chapman. Yoko glances at Chapman briefly. They get into the limousine. Chapman watches them leave. Gorish asks if Chapman wants to grab food. Chapman declines. "I want to wait a bit longer," he says. Gorish leaves. Chapman stays. Hours pass. The crowd thins. By 10 p.m., Chapman is alone outside the Dakota, still holding the signed album. At 10:50 p.m., the limousine returns. John and Yoko step out. They walk toward the archway entrance. Chapman is in the shadows near the street. As John passes under the arch, Chapman calls out, "Mr. Lennon." John turns slightly. Chapman drops into a combat stance, legs spread, two-handed grip, and fires 5 shots. For hit John. 1 in the back. 1 in the shoulder. 2 in the left side of his back, piercing his lung and aorta. John staggers forward, stumbles up 5 steps into the Dakota's lobby, and collapses. Yoko screams. The doorman, Jay Hastings, rushes over. John is conscious, moaning, bleeding massively. Hastings calls 911. Chapman doesn't run. He removes his coat, sits down on the sidewalk, pulls out The Catcher in the Rye, and starts reading. Police arrive within 2 minutes. Officers James Moran and Bill Gamble find Chapman sitting calmly. His gun is on the ground. They cuff him. He doesn't resist. "I acted alone," he says. They put John into the back of a patrol car. No ambulance, faster this way, and rush him to Roosevelt Hospital. Doctors attempt emergency surgery. They open his chest, massage his heart manually, transfuse blood. But the damage is catastrophic. The hollow point bullets shredded his chest cavity. At 11:15 p.m., Dr. Stephen Lynn pronounces John Lennon dead. He was 40 years old. Yoko was there. She kissed his forehead. Outside, news vans were already arriving. The announcement came from newscaster Howard Cosell during Monday Night Football, an unspeakable tragedy. John Lennon, outside his apartment building, was shot twice in the back, rushed to Roosevelt Hospital, dead on arrival. Phones rang across the world. Radio stations played Beatles songs on loop. Fans gathered outside the Dakota, weeping, singing. Vigils erupted globally: London, Tokyo, Sydney, Sao Paulo. On December 14th, Yoko requested a 10-minute silent vigil. Over 100,000 people gathered in Central Park. Millions more participated worldwide. The grief was collective, generational. John Lennon hadn't just been a musician. He'd been a voice, for peace, for honesty, for the possibility of change. Mark David Chapman pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. In court, he read a passage from The Catcher in the Rye. He was sentenced to 20 years to life. He remains imprisoned, denied parole 12 times. In interviews, he's expressed remorse, but also a chilling rationale. He wanted to be famous, and killing John Lennon achieved that. He stole John's fame and made it his own. His name is known because he murdered a legend. That's what he wanted. That's what he got. Yoko remained at the Dakota, raising Sean, managing John's legacy. She released his unfinished recordings, Milk and Honey, in 1984, archival collections over decades. She became an activist, an artist in her own right, finally recognized outside John's shadow. Sean became a musician, carrying his father's name with grace. Julian, John's abandoned first son, struggled, estranged from his father, left out of the will, forced to navigate the legend and the absence. The wound John left behind was deep and complicated. John Lennon's legacy is paradoxical. He sang about peace while being combative. He preached love while abandoning his son. He criticized materialism while living in luxury. Chapman's accusation, phony, wasn't entirely wrong. But it also missed the point. John never claimed to be perfect. His genius was admitting his flaws, his contradictions, his humanity. Imagine remains one of the most powerful songs ever written, a plea for a world without borders, religion, greed. It's idealistic to the point of naivety, but it still moves people. That's John's legacy, imperfect, honest, still resonant. But December 8, 1980, remains an unsolved question in another sense. Could it have been prevented? Chapman stood outside the Dakota for hours. Security saw him. Fans spoke to him. He signed an autograph for the man who would kill him. 5 hours separated that signature from the gunshots. 5 hours where Chapman waited openly, visibly, with a gun in his coat. No one checked. No one questioned. No one thought a pudgy man with an album could be dangerous. And John Lennon walked into an archway at 10:50 p.m. with no security, no bodyguard, no precaution, because he refused to live in fear. That refusal, that insistence on being accessible, on being human, cost him his life. And maybe that's the final tragedy. John Lennon died because he believed people were good. And Mark David Chapman proved him wrong. Some stories end. Legends don't. This is CLS.